The paintings in this room have a secret. This is Imperial War Museum's latest exhibition, Beauty and Destruction. The galleries tell the story of London during the Second World War through the eyes of artists who were there. But 3 of these paintings hold something extra special, a secret that visitors won't get a chance to see. These extraordinary works by Henry Carr, Bernard Hailstone and Joan Connew have paint on both sides of the canvas. So how were these paintings created? Why have they got works on both sides? And what can these paintings tell us about being an artist during the Second World War?
So an artist working on both sides of a canvas is a long established practice, people using materials in an efficient way. That's been going on for many centuries. I think in the context of the Second World War, what's also interesting is that there's a shortage of materials. There is not least rationing, but also just a shortage. Canvas was needed for sails, for kit bags, and so actually artists couldn't get their hands on canvas easily, so there was all the more reason to reuse materials. And in these 3 cases, what we can see is artists kind of working on the back or working ideas out, and it gives us an insight into what else is going on for them during the time of making these particular works.
To understand these paintings, we first need to understand their creation. All 3 found their way to IWM through something called the War Artists Advisory Committee. Set up in 1939 under Sir Kenneth Clark, director of the National Gallery, the committee aimed to create a comprehensive record of the Second World War in Britain.
I think it was understood during the Second World War that artists could play a really important and significant role in representing the experience of war. There was also another thing going on, which was, yes, the role of artists, but also keeping artists alive. We had lost 2 years in the First World War of artists going out and being called up for service, and we don't know what that cultural life could have been had they survived. And so the government was keen to have a scheme that supported the life and livelihoods of artists.
The WAC, as it came to be known, led to the creation of a huge variety of works representing all aspects of the war, from the fighting fronts around the world to the home front all across Britain. Cities and villages, factories and fields, men and women, young and old, were all represented. It ensured that Britain's cultural landscape lived on in spite of the war.
Cultural life was quite active and quite full. I think we think today that perhaps everything came to a grinding halt. That isn't really true. So, for example, we have the Artists International Association producing fundraising exhibitions with the stated aim of promoting peace. The War Artists Advisory Committee members go and buy work from those exhibitions. So there's many ways that the work ultimately finds its way into the national collection, from artists that are, yes, very famous, through to artists that would otherwise have been unknown.
By the end of the scheme, the WAC had amassed well over 5,000 works from around 300 artists. Of them, just under 50 are on display in this latest exhibition. And now we have the background, we can take a closer look at these special 3. This is Blackout by Joan Connew. The WAC bought this work from Connew for 15 guineas, or around £900 in today's money.
We have a car driving down this kind of blackout street with its headlamps dipped, which was a new rule that meant that people had to dip their headlamps in a particular kind of way. We can see the painted curbstones that were black and white in order to aid people not tripping over them. Accidents was actually a very big cause of injury during the blackout years. And so we have this sense of kind of smoky, misty, nighttime scene, but we also have these very particular things that we can pick out of the painting.
Next, let's look at Bernard Hailstone's An Evening in the City. Hailstone was a so-called fireman artist, having joined the auxiliary fire service at the outbreak of the war. His work allowed him privileged access to scenes of devastation, like this one.
There were huge efforts made to protect churches and historical buildings during the Second World War. There was a clear line drawn between the life and vitality of our heritage and how people felt. So you can see a kind of church rising in the background, kind of still standing amongst this kind of scene of abject ruin. And on the right-hand side, there's a glowing wall, just recently bombed material. So he's got the kind of immediacy of the scene and a sense of kind of long history in the protection of those buildings.
Finally, we have Henry Carr's Incendiaries in a Suburb. Carr was one of the WWAC's most prolific artists. He made works across Britain's fighting fronts as well as at home. But this one is more personal than usual, painted in Hampstead.
We often focus on the ways in which bombing hits centrally, but here we're out in the suburbs, and you can see what was happening in the suburbs is that people who lived there had to deal with firefighting themselves. So you see the men of the community coming out of their houses and dealing with these pop-up fires that are happening in the aftermath of an air raid. And you have this real sense of this being a kind of otherwise quiet suburban neighbourhood where it's only really lit up by this kind of explosive scene in the sky.
But that is only one side of these works. To see the full story, we have to go behind the scenes at IWM London to one of our conservation labs. These are the spaces where IWM's objects and artworks are conserved and protected.
When I assess a painting, I not only need to consider what's going on the front, but as well as what's going on the back. I feel incredibly spoiled to be able to access these little secrets of the paintings. I was so surprised when I flip them and look at the back. They are extremely different compared to what we see on the front. Probably they've never been conserved before, and that's why I think it's important to do this now, especially now that they will be reframed properly and we will not have easy access again on them.
The studio reveals 3 hidden works: a life drawing, a serene portrait, and a wipe-off working surface, each totally different to the intense and disorientating wartime scenes painted on the front. But for a conservator, both sides of the canvas are intimately linked.
The problem with double-sided paintings can be that the behavior of what's on the back is different from the one on the front. So I have to consider that any action I take can influence whatever is present on the other side of the painting. This one, for example, paint has been applied quite thickly and with texture, and it's making the cleaning maybe more challenging. You can see the difference from this area here to this area here. The colors are really blackened. We have a similar situation in this instance. Again, it's dirty, but the paint has been applied quite smoothly, so it's coming off with a dry cleaning. This one is creating more problem for the structural point of view, because what we want to avoid is impressing the shape of this material on the front as well. It can be visually slightly disturbing, but the canvas deformation at this stage are not creating any threat to the stability of the painting, so I can leave them as they are. Even though no one will see this area, it's very important to consider the artwork as a whole, back and front.
Thanks to Nicoletta's work, the paintings have been conserved for future generations to enjoy. For us, though, there are still some unanswered questions. What are these works on the back? And what can they tell us about being an artist in wartime?
In the case of Joan Connew, we can see that she's got a life drawing study on the back. Now, that suggests to me that she was also producing life study work, that there were life study classes going on, and it gives us an insight into that really rich cultural life that people are trying to keep going during the wartime experience that they're having, and then perhaps thinking that we don't need to kind of capture that for the long term, and instead moving forward with the blackout scene that then she submitted to an exhibition. In the case of Henry Carr, it's a slightly more puzzling image. It's a woman reading in a kind of Renaissance style. We don't fully know if it was his painting or whether perhaps he'd picked up a canvas at a flea market and kind of made use of a canvas that was otherwise not needed. But it's a much more kind of dislocated portrait of a woman that's intriguing in its own way. In the case of Bernard Hailstone, what we have is really what I would call wipe-off, so a paint kind of on a brush being wiped off on the back of a canvas. And so it might be that he's made use of scraps, essentially, of canvas that he would otherwise be using. It's just insightful in terms of how an artist used a brush, and that can tell us a lot about how a painting was made. All of them, in different ways, are representing the kind of devastation and also the resilience of London as they are living and working in London during this period.
The fronts of these paintings show London at war. The backs reveal the private world of the artists who captured the conflict. Together, they offer a rare 360-degree view of wartime creativity, resilience on one side and reflection on the other.
Thinking about these three and how actually various and diverse the images are is really just indicative of the real depth and variety of experience that artists are capturing during this period. And I hope that's what we bring to audiences who visit Beauty and Destruction, open until November the 1st.